Okay guys, so today I'm going to be making a video on keeping plants in bioactive systems made for animals from arid environments. So let's get straight into the video. So in the past, creating a bioactive system with live plants in it for an arid species was regarded as virtually impossible because people thought it was just going to be far too dry to sustain anything. And still now, people seem to think that it's difficult, but with a bit of research and a bit of time put into thinking about it, it's actually not that hard. So the main thing I would recommend doing, which when I say it, it's going to sound quite obvious, but actually it's not something you'd really think of doing if you're just thinking in terms of the reptile you're going to keep in the setup, and that is actually researching the setup and researching what plants you want to keep in it and how these need to be kept. So obviously we're doing an arid setup here, so you don't want to be looking for a plant that's going to need watering all the time and needs dead high humidity, because it's just not going to work out. So instead you want to look for types of plants that will do okay with irregular watering schedules, and the best candidates for this are succulents, like what you're seeing in front of you, cacti, although you do have to be aware of the spines, because whereas reptiles seem to be quite fine with not getting pricked, it's not very nice if you're working in the enclosure and then you get spined yourself, so that is something to think about. But also ornamental grasses and tillandsia or air plants. Now in general, succulents and that do tend to have very similar care, but obviously they are going to be slightly different depending on the species, so it is something that you're going to have to look into yourself. But my basic care scheme is I make sure that they're planted where they get light. As you can tell, this plant over here, if I just bend you around, you can see that I did plant it so that it was facing into the light, and that is because these succulents do tend to like light, high heating and lighting. The other two are directly underneath the UV bulb and they don't get burnt whatsoever, and neither does this one. In fact, all these plants do actually grow at a relatively rapid rate, whereas when you keep them in pots outside, or well, outside the enclosure, I mean, you're not going to keep them in the garden or anything because it's too cold, but they don't really seem to grow at all. These actually grow quite rapidly. So high heating and lighting is a definite must for these plants, but there is something surprising when it comes to watering. So obviously these plants are themselves evolved to survive in an arid environment, and part of that means that you don't want to water them too much, but you also don't want to water them too little, as I have found out, because I did water them too little a while ago and they did start to die. But with the substrate, this is my substrate layering system. So at the top here we have Arcadia Earth Mix Arid, which has a high rock content in it, which means that it drains relatively freely. So whatever substrate you want to look at getting, definitely make sure it's free draining, because the thing that's bad for these plants is sitting in stagnant water. It's not being watered regularly, that they're fine with, it's being sat in the same water for a long time. And I also do have I have a separation layer here, and then I have some clay balls at the bottom, so that any water that gets through will be sort of sat in a void until it evaporates, and then it goes back into the substrate. But that basically means that there's extra drainage really, and that the plants really will not be sat in water. Conversely, however, it is important that you do water these plants. I've found that the thing that works best is literally just to go in and feel the substrate with your finger around the base of the plants. If you can feel any moisture there at all, leave it and try again the next day. If it feels dry, then give them a decent water. I mean, you don't want to absolutely soak them, but just sort of liberally spray around the base, or what I like to do is actually pour my leopard gecko's water bowl there when I'm going to be filling it back up, and that seems to do the trick. These plants that are over here are right under the heating and lighting, so these actually get watered quite well almost every single day. The other plant that I showed you earlier, that doesn't get watered as much because it's not under the heating, so it tends to stay a bit wetter over there. But that is the basic guideline to watering them, and honestly, when you get the watering right, that is the main key to these plants, and they actually become really easy to keep. In case you're interested, the types of plants I have, this sort of bluey coloured one is an Echeveria. Now this one doesn't look that good because, I mean, it was fantastic when I got it and it even flowered. You can see the little flower stem going up here. But this plant did suffer when I sort of watered them a lot less than I do now, but it's actually coming back. Then next to the Echeveria is a mother-in-law's tongue or snake plant. I don't know the scientific name for this one, so the common name is going to have to do, but they are common enough so you can find them easily. This plant I would definitely recommend as a first plant to get, because this is the only one that didn't suffer or lose any leaves or anything when I had the issue with watering them, and this one has got so much bigger since when I got it, so it's a definitely fantastic plant for beginners. And I also have this plant, which is a Gasteria, and this is a nice looking plant. It's a bit funny with all the spots all over it, and it does seem to grow at a decent rate, so I would definitely recommend it. Okay guys, so that is a basic overview to growing plants in an arid bioactive setup. It really isn't that hard as you might think, because I mean, I've tried growing these things outside the vivarium and had absolutely no success, but growing them inside is actually really easy, I find. And as soon as you've got that watering down, which if you do as I've said and honestly just experiment a bit on your own, then you'll get there eventually, and it's actually really nice because they do grow at a decent rate and you get to see it changing. But anyway, I hope this video has helped you somewhat, or you did find it interesting, and if you did, please leave it a like and do consider subscribing so that you can see more content similar to this, and if you do, I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!